The Celestial Serenity was supposed to be a luxury cruise liner. The brochure had promised 5-star accommodations among the stars and an unforgettable journey through the cosmos. Well, they got the unforgettable part right, just not in the way anyone hoped. I'm Marcus Webb, and I should have known something was wrong when the boarding ramp collapsed twice during embarkation. But hey, I'd already paid for 2 weeks of supposed relaxation, and my corporate health insurance had specifically recommended off-world stress relief. Apparently, dealing with hostile alien merger negotiations for 3 straight years qualified me for the premium wellness package. Captain Zorb bounded onto the observation deck with the kind of enthusiasm that usually preceded disaster. Picture a 6-foot-tall purple jellyfish wearing a captain's hat that was clearly 3 sizes too small, and you've got the right idea. His species, the Blobians, were known for their relentless optimism and their complete inability to recognize danger signs. "Welcome, welcome, esteemed passengers." Zorb's voice bubbled through his translation device. "Isn't this absolutely fantastic? The artificial gravity is only flickering every 12 minutes today, which is a new record." As if on cue, my feet left the deck for about 3 seconds. I watched my fellow passengers bob around like confused balloons. The Quartzians, crystalline beings who looked like walking chandeliers, tinkled musically as they bumped into each other. The plant-like Verdanians rustled their leaves in what I assumed was distress, though with their species it was hard to tell the difference between panic and photosynthesis. "Don't worry about the food replicators," Zorb continued cheerfully, somehow managing to ignore the passenger who was currently stuck to the ceiling. "The green goo they've been producing is probably just a seasonal flavor adjustment. Very nutritious, I'm sure." I'd tried the green goo. It tasted like disappointment and had the texture of regret. The fact that it occasionally moved on its own was just an added bonus. "Captain," called out Nurse Plim, the ship's Centaurian medical officer, "the environmental systems are showing some irregularities." "Irregularities are just opportunities for adventure," Zorb replied, his gelatinous form quivering with excitement. "Besides, what's the worst that could happen?" Famous last words right there. The next few days were a masterclass in creative disaster management. The entertainment system played only Blobian opera, which sounded like someone torturing a space whale. The swimming pool had been drained for maintenance, but was now home to what appeared to be a small ecosystem of unidentified floating objects. And the less said about the spa treatments, the better. Apparently, being encased in crystallized methane was considered rejuvenating somewhere in the galaxy. But I have to admit there was something almost zen about the complete chaos. After years of managing corporate hostile takeovers and mediating disputes between species that communicated through controlled nuclear reactions, a simple disaster cruise was almost relaxing. That changed when Chief Engineer Blink, a nervous insectoid with too many eyes, skittered up to Captain Zorb during dinner. The green goo had been particularly active that evening, actually forming small pyramids on several plates. "Captain," Blink chittered, "our sensors are detecting an approaching vessel." Zorb's entire body lit up with bioluminescent joy. "Oh, how wonderful. Visitors? They're probably just dropping by to say hello. Maybe they've heard about our fantastic hospitality." I looked out the viewport at the approaching ship. It was painted matte black, bristled with weapons, and had what appeared to be a skull motif covering most of its hull. Either this was the most aggressively decorated welcome wagon in the galaxy, or we were about to have a very different kind of visitor experience. "Should I hail them, Captain?" Blink asked, his antennae twitching with anxiety. "Of course. Let them know we'd love to have them aboard for dinner. There's plenty of green goo for everyone." I set down my fork and watched the skull ship grow larger in the viewport. Somehow I doubted they were coming for the cuisine. The boarding was surprisingly polite, all things considered. They only blasted 3 minor holes in the hull, and they did remember to say please when demanding our unconditional surrender. Professional courtesy, I suppose. Their leader strutted onto the bridge like he owned the place, which technically he now did. Snacks the Terrible was about 4 feet tall, covered in purple scales, and wore what appeared to be a leather jacket made from some unfortunate space creature. His species, the Vexlings, were known for their aggressive nature and their tendency to overcompensate for their diminutive stature. "Greetings, pathetic life forms," Snacks announced, his voice artificially deepened by a voice modulator that made him sound like a coffee grinder with anger issues. "I am Snacks the Terrible, terror of the spaceways, nightmare of the galaxy, and your new worst enemy." Captain Zorb clapped his pseudopods together in delight. "Oh, how exciting. We don't get many professional entertainers on board. Are you here for the dinner show?" Snacks's left eye twitched. "I'm not an entertainer, you gelatinous fool. I'm a pirate." "Even better," Zorb bubbled. "I love themed performances. Very authentic costume work, by the way." Behind Snacks, his crew filed onto the bridge with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Grunk was a massive, gray-skinned brute who looked like someone had taken a boulder and taught it to hold weapons. His species, the Rockheads, were aptly named both for their stone-like appearance and their intellectual capacity. "Boss," Grunk rumbled in a voice like distant thunder, "should I start smashing things?" "Not yet, Grunk. We're being professional today." Next came Whispers, and I had to admire the irony of his name. He was tall, thin, and moved like shadow given form. His species, the Shadowkin, were natural stealth specialists, but Whispers had apparently missed the memo about being intimidating. When he spoke, it was in the softest, most polite whisper imaginable. "Excuse me," he murmured to a terrified Quartzian passenger. "I'm terribly sorry to bother you, but could you please move to the designated hostage area? Thank you so much for your cooperation." The Quartzian, too shocked to resist, simply tinkled nervously and shuffled where directed. Finally, there was Fizz, their tech specialist. She was a hyperactive sparkler, a species that looked like someone had crossed a ferret with a lightning bolt. She bounced around the bridge, examining everything with the enthusiasm of a kid in a candy store. "Oh wow, is this a Mark V sensor array?" she chirped, running her claws over the control panel. "These are so retro. And look at this gravitational stabilizer. It's held together with actual duct tape. That's so charmingly primitive." Snacks tried to regain control of the situation. "Citizens of this pathetic vessel, you are now prisoners of the most feared pirate crew in this sector. Resistance is futile, your possessions are forfeit, and your lives hang by a thread." The alien passengers reacted about as well as expected. The Verdanians immediately tried to root themselves to the deck, apparently believing that if they pretended to be furniture, the pirates might overlook them. The Quartzians began vibrating at frequencies that made my teeth ache, their version of a panic attack. One of the Blobians, a tourist named Gloop, actually tried to hide behind Captain Zorb, despite being roughly the same size and consistency. "This is so thrilling," Zorb announced to no one in particular. "It's just like those adventure holodramas, except much more interactive." I watched the whole scene unfold with the kind of detached interest you develop after years in corporate mediation. The pirates were clearly new at this, their leader was overcompensating for something, and their operational efficiency was questionable at best. Fizz was still examining the bridge equipment like she was at a technology museum. Whispers was apologizing to everyone he corralled, and Grunk seemed confused about whether he was supposed to be menacing or helpful. "You." Snacks pointed at me with a weapon that looked suspiciously like a modified kitchen utensil. "Human. What pathetic treasures do you carry?" I held up my hands in mock surrender. "Just a tourist, I'm afraid. Wallet, some vacation photos, and a really boring work tablet. Nothing worth getting excited about." Snacks's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that. Strip the ship of everything valuable. Take prisoners. Make them tremble with fear." Whispers raised a tentative hand. Boss? Should we really make them tremble? That seems rather rude." It's pirate protocol, whispers. Oh, all right then. But I'll apologize afterward. As the pirates began their terrifying takeover, I couldn't help but notice their technique was more Three Stooges than Blackbeard. Grunk kept getting distracted by shiny objects. Fizz was now trying to help the engineer fix a malfunctioning console. And Whispers was engaged in what appeared to be a philosophical discussion with one of the Quartzian passengers about the morality of theft. Snacks, meanwhile, was barking orders that his crew either ignored or misunderstood completely. This was shaping up to be the most polite pirate raid in galactic history. Right then, Snacks declared, his voice modulator crackling with feedback, "We're taking hostages back to our ship, starting with the most dangerous-looking ones." His eyes swept the assembled passengers and crew. They passed over Grunk's species mate, a rockhead engineer who could probably bench press a shuttle. They skipped the Verdanian diplomat whose thorns were literally dripping with neurotoxins. They even ignored the Quartzian who was vibrating so hard he was starting to emit X-rays. Instead, Snacks pointed directly at me. "The human comes with us." I blinked. "Me? I'm probably the least dangerous person on this ship." Exactly what a dangerous person would say, Snacks declared triumphantly. "Humans are known for their sneaky nature. You're coming with us for interrogation." Well, this was going to be interesting. The pirate ship's holding area had all the charm of a government waiting room. If government waiting rooms were designed by someone who had only heard waiting rooms described by a drunk alien with a head injury. The lighting flickered between migraine-inducing and existential dread, and the ventilation system sounded like it was processing gravel. My fellow hostages huddled in various states of panic. The Quartzian businessman, who'd introduced himself as Clinkton, was rapidly cycling through colors like a disco ball having a nervous breakdown. Nurse Plim kept checking everyone's vital signs with the kind of professional concern that suggested she expected us all to drop dead at any moment. I, on the other hand, was genuinely curious about the whole operation. "So," I said to Fizz, who was supposed to be guarding us but was instead trying to fix what appeared to be a broken coffee machine, "how long have you all been in the piracy business?" Fizz looked up from her repair work, her eyes literally sparkling with excitement. "Oh, about 6 months now." "Well, 3 months if you don't count the time we spent lost in that asteroid field because someone," she glared in the direction of the bridge, "refused to ask for directions." "And before piracy?" "I was in tech support, but the hours were terrible, and my supervisor never appreciated my initiative. Plus, none. There was no opportunity for creative problem solving. Do you know how boring it is to explain the same simple network protocols over and over again to beings who think a router is some kind of exotic pet?" I nodded sympathetically. Management never understands the technical challenges, do they? Exactly. You get it. Like just last week I suggested we upgrade our targeting systems. But Snacks said we couldn't afford it. So now we're using modified agricultural scanners for our weapons guidance. Do you know how hard it is to intimidate someone when your threat assessment keeps categorizing them as root vegetables? Clinkton chimed in with a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. "Are you seriously having a casual conversation with our captor?" "She's not a captor," I explained patiently. "She's a team member experiencing job dissatisfaction and seeking professional validation. Aren't you, Fizz?" Fizz's entire body lit up with bioluminescent joy. "Yes, that's exactly it. Finally, someone who understands workplace dynamics." The holding area door slid open with the kind of grinding noise that suggested it would need major repairs soon. Grunk squeezed through, ducking to avoid hitting his head on the frame. "Boss wants to see the human," he announced in his gravelly voice. "Which human?" Fizz asked. Grunk stared at her for a moment, then looked around the room at the distinctly non-human collection of hostages. "The human one." "That would be me," I said, standing up. Grunk nodded slowly, as if processing this information required significant computational effort. "You're coming with me for interrogation." "Sounds good. Lead the way." As we walked through the ship's corridors, I couldn't help but notice the operational inefficiencies. Cables hung loose from ceiling panels, spare parts were scattered randomly on the floor, and there was a definite organizational problem with their storage systems. "Grunk," I said conversationally, "can I ask you something?" He looked down at me suspiciously. "Boss said you might try to trick me with words." "No tricks, just professional curiosity. What did you do before joining Snacks's crew?" "Construction," he replied after a moment. "Did you like it?" Grunk stopped walking, which was like watching a small building come to a halt. "What kind of question is that?" "A simple one. Did construction work make you happy?" For a moment, Grunk's perpetual scowl softened slightly. "I liked building things, making something new where there was nothing before. But the foreman always yelled, said I was too slow, too stupid, too clumsy, said I'd never amount to nothing. That must have been frustrating." "Yeah." Grunk's massive hands clenched into fists. "Made me angry all the time." "And now you're taking that anger out on innocent tourists?" Grunk considered this for several seconds. "I guess. But pirates are supposed to be angry, right?" "Are they? Or are they supposed to be effective?" Before Grunk could wrestle with that philosophical question, we arrived at what I assumed was Snacks's office. It was decorated in intimidating dictator chic, with way too much black leather and several weapons mounted on the walls that looked more decorative than functional. Ah, the mysterious human. Snacks spun around in his chair, which was clearly designed for someone much taller, making him look like a child playing dress-up. "Prepare yourself for interrogation." "I'm prepared," I said, taking a seat without being invited. "Should I be worried about good cop, bad cop? Or are you more of a one-man operation?" Snacks's eye twitched again. "I ask the questions here." "Of course." "Fire away." Snacks clearly hadn't expected compliance. "What is your purpose on that pathetic cruise ship?" "Vacation. 2 weeks of relaxation, or at least that's what I paid for. The reality has been somewhat different, but I'm adaptable." "Vacation," Snacks repeated suspiciously. "What kind of work do you do?" "I'm in human resources, specifically workplace mediation and conflict resolution." Snacks leaned back, looking confused. "What does that mean?" I help solve problems between different groups of people, usually when they can't work together effectively." "It's actually quite similar to what you're trying to do here, just with different methodologies." "I'm not trying to solve problems. I'm trying to create them." "Are you, though?" I pulled out my work tablet, which Fizz had kindly returned after determining it wasn't worth stealing. "From what I've observed, you're running a small team with diverse skill sets, attempting to generate revenue through aggressive market acquisition. That's not creating problems, that's entrepreneurship." Snacks stared at me for a long moment. "I think you're trying to confuse me." "Not at all. I'm trying to understand your business model. Speaking of which, do you have an organizational chart? I'd love to see how you've structured your reporting hierarchy." For the first time since I'd met him, Snacks the Terrible looked genuinely terrified. 20 minutes later, I was getting the grand tour of the pirate ship, and it was even worse than I'd expected. The engine room looked like someone had exploded a hardware store inside a recycling center, but the navigation system was held together with what appeared to be chewing gum and wishful thinking, and their inventory tracking consisted of a handwritten list that Grunk had been updating with a crayon. "So this is our weapons control," Fizz explained enthusiastically, leading me to a console that sparked ominously every few seconds. "I've been trying to upgrade it, but Snacks says we can't afford proper components, so I've been improvising with kitchen appliances and parts from the environmental system." Hence the coffee machine in the holding area that's been repurposed as a guard post monitor? Exactly. You really do understand efficiency optimization. I made a note on my tablet. Fizz, can I ask you something in confidence? Sure. She bounced on her toes, literally sparking with excitement. What's your long-term career goal here? I mean, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Her sparks dimmed slightly. Well, I assumed I'd still be fixing things and making them work better. But honestly, I miss having colleagues who appreciate innovation. Snacks mostly just tells me to make the weapons more weapon Y, which isn't very specific feedback. Have you considered transitioning back to legitimate tech work? With your improvisational skills and creative problem solving, you'd be highly valued in the corporate sector. Really? But wouldn't I need references? I'd be happy to provide a reference. Your ability to maintain critical systems under resource constraints is genuinely impressive. Fizz's entire body lit up like a Christmas tree. Nobody's ever called my work impressive before. Our conversation was interrupted by whispers materializing from the shadows, because that's apparently what he did. Excuse me, he murmured apologetically. I hate to interrupt, but Snacks X sent me to make sure you weren't corrupting Fizz with your sneaky human psychology. Actually, I was just discussing career development. Whispers, what's your professional background? Oh well, he wrung his hands nervously. I was a librarian before this. Specialized in rare manuscripts and archival systems. A librarian? That's fantastic. What made you leave? Budget cuts. They said my department was redundant because everything was being digitized. But there's something special about physical books, you know? The weight of knowledge in your hands, the smell of old paper, the satisfaction of a perfectly organized catalog system. His voice grew wistful, and I could see the passion in his eyes. You miss it. Terribly. But Snacks X said my stealth skills would be valuable for piracy, and I needed the work. Whispers, have you heard of the Galactic Archive Initiative? They're always looking for specialists in physical media preservation. And your natural stealth abilities would be perfect for securing rare collections in dangerous locations. Really? You think I'd be qualified? Absolutely. In fact, I have some contacts in that field. Would you like me to make some introductions? Whispers looked like he might cry if his species was capable of tears. You'd do that, but we're holding you hostage. You're doing your job. I respect professional dedication, even if I disagree with the methods. We continued the tour, and I continued my impromptu consulting session. The ship's inventory system was a disaster, their command structure was unclear, and their mission objectives were poorly defined. But more importantly, every single crew member was fundamentally unhappy with their career choice. Grunk rejoined us in what they generously called the tactical planning room, which was actually just a closet with a folding table. Human, he rumbled. Can I ask you something? Of course, Grunk. You said that thing about being effective instead of angry. What did you mean? Mean. I set down my tablet and gave him my full attention. Grunk, why do you think you get angry? Because things don't work right. Because people tell me I'm stupid. Because nothing I do is ever good enough. And how does being angry help with those problems? Grunk considered this with the intensity of someone solving advanced calculus. Wit doesn't. Right. Anger is just a symptom. The real problem is that you're not in an environment where your skills are valued and utilized properly. You're a builder, Grunk. You create things. But this job has you tearing things down instead. But I need money. Construction workers make good money, especially skilled ones. And there's always demand for beings who can work in zero-G environments or hostile atmospheres. Have you considered specialized station construction? Or deep space platform assembly? Grunk's eyes widened slightly. I always wanted to work on the big orbital habitats. But the company said I needed more experience. Experience you could get if you weren't spending your time playing pirate. For a moment, the holding area was quiet except for the ship's groaning hull and the distant sound of something electrical catching fire. Then Whispers cleared his throat delicately. "But, Marcus, may I call you Marcus?" "Of course. Well, what exactly do you do in your human resources position?" I smiled. "Nay, I help dysfunctional teams identify their core problems, develop strategies for better collaboration, and find career paths that actually suit their individual strengths and interests." "So you're doing for us what you do professionally?" "In a manner of speaking, yes." Fizz giggled, a sound like wind chimes made of electricity. "We're getting career counseling from our hostage." That's when the ship's alert system started screaming, which was unfortunate because it meant our little therapy session was about to be interrupted by what I assumed was either a catastrophic system failure or the arrival of law enforcement. Knowing this crew's luck, it was probably both. The team meeting Snacks reluctantly agreed to was held in the ship's main cargo bay, mostly because it was the only space large enough to accommodate everyone and the growing pile of technical documentation I'd been generating. "I don't understand why we're doing this," Snacks complained for the fourth time, perched on a crate of what appeared to be stolen agricultural equipment. "We're pirates. We don't have meetings." "Every successful organization has meetings," I replied, setting up my tablet to project organizational charts onto the bulkhead. "How else do you align objectives, optimize resource allocation, and maintain team cohesion?" "By being terrifying and making people do what I say." "How's that working out for you so far?" Snacks opened his mouth to reply, then closed it again as the ship shuddered around us. Something was definitely wrong with either the engines or the structural integrity, and from the sparks shooting out of various control panels, possibly both. "Right," I continued. "Let's start with a basic operational assessment. Fizz, what would you say is the biggest challenge facing your technical operations?" "Well," Fizz began, bouncing nervously, "we keep trying to raid ships that are either too well defended, completely empty, or carrying cargo that's worthless by the time we figure out what it is. Like last month, we spent 3 days capturing a freighter full of what we thought were rare crystals. But they turned out to be decorative bathroom tiles." "Bathroom tiles," I repeated, making a note. "Very pretty bathroom tiles," Whispers added helpfully. "I thought they might work well in a reading room." Grunk rumbled in agreement. "Good for building things. Better than trying to break things." Snacks's voice modulator crackled with frustration. "We're supposed to steal valuable cargo, not discuss interior decoration." "But boss," Fizz continued, "we keep failing because we don't do proper reconnaissance. I keep telling you we need better scanning equipment and target analysis, but you always say just shoot first and sort it out later. Because that's what pirates do." "Is it though?" I pulled up a holographic display of successful piracy operations throughout galactic history. The most effective maritime pirates on Earth, for example, were actually extremely well-organized business people. They had intelligence networks, supply chains, and strategic partnerships. They succeeded because they treated piracy as a professional enterprise, not a random violent spree. Snacks stared at the historical data. "Those are Earth pirates?" "Some of the most successful entrepreneurs in human history, depending on your perspective. The key was organization and strategic planning." "I like planning," Whispers said quietly. "I always preferred jobs where I could research and prepare thoroughly." "Which brings us to career satisfaction," I said, pulling up the survey results I'd compiled. "Fizz, you indicated that you miss having colleagues who value innovation. Whispers, you feel underutilized in your current role. Grunk, you're experiencing chronic workplace frustration because your natural talents aren't being leveraged effectively. What about me? Snacks demanded. I pulled up his profile. You're experiencing leadership burnout because you're trying to manage a team without clear objectives or proper resource allocation. Plus, you're in a high-stress environment where failure could result in imprisonment or death, which would cause anxiety for anyone. Snacks's scales shifted color slightly. I'm not anxious. I'm fierce and terrifying. Snacks, Whispers said gently. You've been stress molting for 3 months. That's normal. You molted during the bathroom tile incident, Grunt pointed out. And when the navigation system broke, Fizz added. And yesterday when you couldn't open that jar of pickles, Whispers concluded. I consulted my notes. Snacks, what made you decide to become a pirate? Because I wanted to be feared and respected across the galaxy. And do you feel feared and respected? There was a long pause. Not really, no. What would make you feel genuinely accomplished? Another pause, longer this time. I don't know. I used to think about running my own business, being successful, making my father proud. His voice trailed off. Your father doesn't approve of the piracy career? He keeps asking when I'm going to get a real job and settle down. Says I'm wasting my potential. Fizz reached over and patted Snacks's shoulder sympathetically. That sounds really hard. It is. Snacks's voice modulator finally gave up entirely, and his natural voice was much higher and more vulnerable than his artificial one. I thought if I became successful at piracy, he'd finally be impressed. But we're terrible at it. We can't even properly rob a cruise ship full of tourists. Because none of you actually want to be pirates, I said gently. You want to be successful, valued, and appreciated for your unique talents. There's nothing wrong with that. But you're trying to achieve those goals through a career path that doesn't suit any of your personalities or skill sets. That's when the proximity alarm started screaming, and Captain Zorb's voice crackled through the ship's communication system. Attention, pirate friends. The Galactic Security Forces have arrived and would like to have a chat. Isn't that exciting? Through the cargo bay's viewport, I could see the sleek, well-maintained ships of the GSF moving into formation around us. They looked extremely professional and competent, which was going to be a stark contrast to our current situation. We're all going to prison, Whispers whispered. Not necessarily, I said, standing up and straightening my shirt. But we're definitely going to need a new strategic approach. Snacks looked up at me with what I recognized as the desperate expression of middle management facing a budget review. What do we do? I smiled and picked up my tablet. We're going to do what every successful organization does when facing a crisis. We're going to pivot. The surrender negotiations were surprisingly smooth, mostly because I'd already filled out the preliminary paperwork and prepared a comprehensive briefing document for the GSF boarding party. Commander Strix, a no-nonsense avian officer with the kind of military bearing that suggested she'd seen every type of criminal foolishness in her career, read through my report with increasing bewilderment. Let me get this straight, she said, looking over her reading glasses at the assembled former pirates. You've reformed an entire pirate crew using corporate team-building exercises? Workplace mediation and career counseling, I corrected. Though there was some overlap with team-building principles. Snacks, now wearing his natural voice in a much more relaxed posture, raised his hand tentatively. Commander, I'd like to formally surrender and request information about rehabilitation programs, specifically ones that might help me transition into legitimate small business ownership. I've compiled a list of suitable programs, I added, handing her a data pad, along with character references for each crew member and recommendations for community service placements that would utilize their existing skills. Commander Strix looked at Fizz, who was bouncing excitedly while explaining her ideas for improving GSF communications equipment to a bemused technical officer. She looked at Whispers, who was already deep in conversation with the ship's librarian about archival systems. She looked at Grunk, who was carefully examining the construction of the GSF ship's docking clamps and asking thoughtful questions about zero-G welding techniques. "This is the most polite arrest I've ever conducted," she admitted. Captain Zorb arrived with his usual perfect timing and boundless enthusiasm. "Marcus, there you are. How was your cultural immersion experience? I hope our pirate friends were suitably entertaining." "Very educational," I replied. "I learned a lot about team dynamics and organizational psychology." "Wonderful. And the pirates learned about hospitality and friendship, I'm sure." Snacks actually smiled at this, his first genuine expression of happiness I'd seen. "Actually, Captain, we learned quite a lot. Marcus helped us understand that we were pursuing the wrong career objectives and gave us tools for making better professional choices." "How delightful. See, I told you this cruise would be unforgettable." Commander Strix finished processing the surrender paperwork with record efficiency. Apparently, having willing participants who'd already completed their own arrest documentation made her job significantly easier. "Well," she said, sealing the last of the legal documents, "I have to say this is a first. Usually, pirate surrenders involve more violence and significantly more paperwork. Mr. Webb, I'm curious about your professional background." "Senior Director of Hostile Workplace Mediation for Omnicorp Solutions," I replied, handing her my business card. "We specialize in resolving conflicts between different species and cultural groups, usually in high-stress corporate environments." "Hostile workplace mediation?" "When two companies merge and the employees can't work together, or when you're trying to integrate multiple alien cultures into a single operational framework. Things can get tense, sometimes extremely tense. I once mediated a dispute between a hive-mind collective and a radical individualist species. Took 3 months, but we got them collaborating on a joint mining operation." Commander Strix examined my card with new interest. "Have you ever considered law enforcement consulting?" "Occasionally, though I prefer prevention to intervention." "Clearly." She gestured at the former pirates, who were now engaged in what appeared to be career counseling sessions with various GSF officers. "How many hostile situations have you resolved?" "This year, 17 pirate crews, 3 mercenary companies, a corporate takeover that had devolved into actual warfare, and 1 entire species that was planning to declare war on the Galactic Council over a trade dispute." "One species?" "The Thornlings of Sector 7. Turned out they were just frustrated because nobody ever asked for their input on trade negotiations. Once we set up proper communication channels and gave them a voice in the process, they became quite reasonable. They're actually excellent mediators themselves now." Commander Strix was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Webb, would you be interested in a consulting contract with GSF?" "Possibly. What did you have in mind?" "We have a lot of similar situations. Pirates, smugglers, rebel groups, territorial disputes. Most of them end up in lengthy legal proceedings or expensive military interventions. If even half of them could be resolved through your methods." I considered this. It would be interesting work, more variety than corporate environments, and you'd be helping people find better paths forward, just like you did here. That was true. Looking around at the former pirate crew, I could see they were already more relaxed and optimistic than they'd been during their criminal careers. Fizz was practically glowing with excitement about her job prospects. Whispers had found a new sense of purpose, and Grunk was discussing construction techniques with the kind of enthusiasm I hadn't seen from him before. "I'll consider it," I told Commander Strix. Snacks approached us, looking nervous but determined. "Marcus, I wanted to thank you. For the first time in years, I actually feel hopeful about the future." "What are you planning to do?" Commander Strix says there's a small business development program for reformed criminals. I'm thinking about opening a logistics consulting firm. Turns out all that planning we never did for piracy raids. That's actually a valuable skill set when applied legally. That's a brilliant idea. You'll do well. Snacks beamed, his scales shifting to a much brighter, healthier color. And Marcus? When I call my father to tell him about the business plan, I'm going to mention that you helped me find my path. I think he'd like to meet you. I'd be honored. The transfer of prisoners, or rather the voluntary relocation of career counseling participants, went smoothly. The GSF officers seemed almost disappointed that there wasn't more excitement involved. Apparently, arresting people who thanked you and asked about job placement programs wasn't what they'd signed up for. As the former pirates were escorted to their rehabilitation transport, Fizz bounced over to me one last time. Marcus. I almost forgot. I fixed the cruise ship's replicators while we were waiting. They should actually produce food now instead of green goo. That's very thoughtful of you. And I left some upgrades for their navigation system. Nothing fancy, just some efficiency improvements. Oh, and I programmed the entertainment system to play something other than Blobby and opera. The passengers will appreciate that. It's the least I could do after the whole hostage situation. Whispers materialized beside us with his characteristic apologetic smile. Marcus, I've left a complete inventory of everything we took from the ship. I've also organized it by owner and estimated value for insurance purposes. Very professional. I learned a lot about organizational systems from this experience. I think I'm going to enjoy archival work much more than I enjoyed piracy. Even Grunk lumbered over to shake my hand with surprising gentleness for someone who could probably arm wrestle a shuttle. Thank you, he said simply, for helping me understand that being strong doesn't mean being angry. You're welcome, Grunk. Good luck with the construction work. I'm going to build something beautiful, he promised. Something that helps people instead of hurting them. As the GSF ships departed with their unusual cargo of grateful former criminals, Captain Zorb bounced over to me with his perpetual enthusiasm undimmed by the recent excitement. Well, Marcus, how would you rate your cruise experience so far? I do hope the pirate encounter met your expectations for adventure. I pulled out my personal tablet and opened my travel review app. Let's see. Accommodations were basic but functional. Food service significantly improved after technical intervention. Entertainment was unique, though not everyone's taste. Cultural immersion was exceptional, definitely above average for passenger interaction with local criminal elements. Wonderful. And the staff? Professional development opportunities were outstanding. I'd definitely recommend this cruise to anyone interested in hands-on conflict resolution experience. Excellent. 4 stars? 4 stars, I confirmed, submitting the review. Captain Zorb's bioluminescence intensified with joy. Oh, how marvelous. Wait until I tell the crew. Our first 4-star review. Captain, Chief Engineer Blink chittered nervously, approaching with what appeared to be a navigation chart. I hate to interrupt the celebration, but we need to discuss our next destination. Of course. Where are we headed next on our fantastic voyage? Blink's antennae drooped with what I'd learned to recognize as his species' version of existential dread. Well, sir, according to our schedule, our next port of call is Shadowhaven Station. Captain Zorb clapped his pseudopods together in delight. How exciting. I've never been to Shadowhaven. What's it known for? It's the most notorious pirate haven in this sector of the galaxy, sir. Home to at least 12 different criminal organizations, 3 active smuggling cartels, and what the Galactic Security Force describes as a wretched hive of scum and villainy. How wonderfully colorful. I'm sure they'll all be very friendly once they get to know us. I looked up from my tablet, where I was already pulling up information about Shadowhaven Station. According to my research, it was essentially a lawless trading post where disputes were settled with plasma weapons, and the local government consisted of whoever had the biggest ship and the most guns. Captain, I said carefully, Perhaps we should consider an alternate route? Nonsense. The brochure specifically promises visits to authentic local cultural sites. This sounds perfectly authentic. Chief Engineer Blink made a sound that was somewhere between a whimper and a death rattle. Sir, I really don't think the Celestial Serenity is equipped for that kind of cultural authenticity. Oh, pish-posh. What could go wrong? Besides, we have Marcus with us now. He's already demonstrated his remarkable ability to handle challenging social situations. I felt a familiar sensation in my stomach, the same one I got when a corporate client described their simple little merger that turned out to involve 3 different species who communicated through ritualized combat. Well, I said, closing my tablet and settling back in my chair, I suppose my vacation could use a little more excitement. Captain Zorb's entire gelatinous form practically vibrated with happiness. Wonderful. Set course for Shadowhaven Station. This is going to be the most educational cruise in the history of space tourism. As the Celestial Serenity adjusted its heading toward what was arguably the most dangerous port in known space, I couldn't help but smile. After all, I'd just successfully reformed an entire pirate crew using nothing but PowerPoint presentations and active listening techniques. How much trouble could one space station full of criminals really be? The answer, as I would soon discover, was considerably more than I'd anticipated. But that's another story entirely.